Enmity's Edge by Elliot Hamer. The Land Raider convoy reached a halt, fresh snow falling from their hulls as they came to rest. Their forest green livery would ordinarily be a heartening sight to the Astra Militarum forces gathered before them, but the harsh brutality of war on the ice world of Rimanok meant that there was little jubilation at their arrival. Motors stood idle as the assault ramp of the lead vehicle lowered, its interior light illuminating the late gloom, and out strode Lazarus and his fellow angels of death. The Imperial Guardsmen were despondent, the whites of their eyes showing a regiment close to breaking point. They were taking what little cover they could find in bombed-out ruins, huddled around flame burners in a pitiful effort to escape the biting cold and indiscriminate psi bombardments. Colonel Barkus, Rimanok, 31st Ice Warriors. The Astra Militarum officer gave a shaky salute. The Prism stands. We've gone through 80% of our artillery stockpile, and even had 2 Marauder runs on it. Each time it's swallowed our warheads whole. Ate 'em up and carried on flickering. We're just about out of ideas, sir, and these Emperor-damned psi bombardments have us at our wits' end. Lazarus turned his sights to the Prism. Across the plateau, an immaterial prismatic spectrum stood in the center of the enemy's line. The size of a warlord titan, endless strands of color flowed from pinnacle to base, its patterns both seamless and sickening all at once. At its tip, a small but similarly colored sphere was rolling in suspension. Even as Lazarus evaluated it, its rotations grew faster and faster, the shimmering colors a haze of confusion to his mind. There was a commotion on the parapet as the Ice Warriors ran for cover. "Eyes down!" The sphere cast off, cannonading itself through the air at high velocity and making impact 50 meters from Lazarus's position. A kaleidoscopic detonation erupted, firing off retina-searing waves of warp energy in all directions. Those in the blast zone fell to the floor in agony, whilst those who did not avert their gaze or have their vision shielded behind a helmet of power armor were similarly afflicted. Guardsmen curled up on the ground, their heads swelling to bursting point as their senses were overloaded. Frenzied eyes became bulbous with stimulation until a wet pop showered the ground with their contents. Viscous fluid leaked from their ears, noses, and now empty eye sockets. An effluence of blood and brains that was accompanied by the harrowing screams of the dying. Commissars drew their bolt pistols, not for the first time that day, and walked the parapet delivering the Emperor's peace. Librarian Ithuriel's brow was heavy with concern. "What is it, brother?" Lazarus asked, turning to him. "This is unlike anything I've witnessed before," the librarian responded. "The prism must fall, but if it's impervious to arms fire..." The librarian trailed off in thought. Lazarus gave him time. In his experience, the right strategy wasn't one found on impulse. "Its appearance is too sudden to be the consequence of a ritual or warp incursion," Ithuriel continued. "I would have sensed it earlier if so. It must have a more localized cause. An artifact perhaps, or a powerful psyker." Lazarus's mind worked over an amassment of details and possibilities. As he processed his plan, the prism continued to flicker. Another sphere had manifested at the pinnacle, smaller than the last, but slowly growing with each variegated rotation. "If it's an artifact, can you contain it?" he asked Ithuriel. "Yes, it is powerful, so I might not be able to shut it down completely, but I can smother its effects long enough for the rest of the Librarius to lend aid." "Good," Lazarus replied, "because if it's a psyker, I can kill it." Lazarus opened a channel-wide vox. "All forces, this is Master Lazarus. Prepare to commence spearhead assault. I want every available gun covering our advance. An evil has rooted itself in Rimanok, and we will cut it out." At the tip of the spear, Ardent Advance, Lazarus's Land Raider Crusader, carved a path across the frozen plateau, snowdrifts and boulders smashed aside by its implacable offense. A staccato of projectile impacts sounded across its hull as the small arms fire of the enemy bounced off its armored plating. Hundreds of rounds were shot back in return as the vehicle's hurricane bolters and assault cannons tore mutants, beastmen, and cultists asunder. To its rear, Predator squadrons, Devastator squads, and battle tanks of the Rimanok 19th Heavy Armor bombarded the enemy. Massed packs of demon engines spat back blasts of ectoplasma and let off salvos with their Hades autocannons that seared and rent the transports of the advancing Dark Angels. The survivors pulled themselves clear of the wreckage, only to be brought low by the hateful volleys of the heretics. The blood of martyrs is the seed of the Imperium, Lazarus thought to himself. 30 seconds out! His command squad drew their weapons, and Ithuriel focused his mind for the psychic battle ahead. They knew not the outcome of a close assault on the prism, but doubt was not their way. They would follow Lazarus into the great rift itself without a word uttered, and cast it back with bolt, blade, and indignation. 20 seconds! A large projectile scored a penetrating hit. The Hurricane Bolter's sponson was torn off, and one half of its magazine ignited. 4 warriors went down in the explosion. 10 seconds! Another hit jolted them forward, a las cannon blast that seared a hole through the drive bay. The driver was a bloody mess, but he clinged to life to fulfill his duty. He hit the mechanism to deploy the Crusaders' assault ramp and aimed straight for the prism. Disembark! Lazarus ran down the ramp and into the heart of madness. Stepping through the prismatic barrier, his charge was stalled by an ominous weight upon his psyche. His senses began to desert him. The stimuli was there, yet his mind could not process it. Every step was an exertion, every breath a labor of effort. He was aware, yet felt powerless to compel his body to react. Lazarus surveyed his surroundings. At the center of the prism stood a sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, his arms raised and waves of color flowing through his form. Ithuriel had been right. I am a vessel of the Emperor's vengeance, spat Lazarus, forcing his way forward through the relentless waves of psychic force, but every step became harder than the last. The synapses in his brain were shutting down, his body refusing to respond to mental commands. All about him, those that had survived the armored rush were similarly afflicted. Many had fallen, their forms deathly still on the icy floor. Brother Ithuriel was on one knee, showing the strain of a mind waging war on a different plane. Lazarus raised his bolt pistol. I am his wrath made manifest. He unloaded his magazine at his enemy, the strain of the act pulling most of his shots wide. Any that found their mark bounced harmlessly off ceramite armor. What was once second nature was now an exercise in futility. The sorcerer glanced over at Lazarus, a contemptuous gaze and disdainful scoff his only reply, before his vision returned to the prism and his ritual continued. Lazarus dropped to one knee, his life force breaking down under the psychic onslaught. He screamed at his mind and body to respond with the one last kernel of resistance within him that would not give in. Mere meters away, Ithuriel was fatally succumbing to a greater psyche. Lazarus felt his brother reach into his mind and infuse his last vestiges of strength into him. The defiance that powered Lazarus was stoked, an ember of fury that would not be extinguished, and a blaze of righteous repugnance was set. As Ithuriel's duty came to an end, Lazarus was rejuvenated. Through my deeds his will be done, Lazarus vowed as he rose up to his feet, lifting his sword above his head in an indomitable redoubt against the psychic torrent. All that he had left was summoned as he hurled the blade through the air. It flew, its energized edge alight with Lazarus's loathing, and found its mark. Lazarus's sword cut through ceramite and buried itself to the hilt in his enemy's chest. The sorcerer fell to his knees in shock, the prism contracting as his arms fell to his sides. His head lolled onto his breastplate as hot blood fell to the frozen ground, and tendrils of steam curled upwards around his fallen form. The prism exploded, throwing polychromatic discharge across the battlefield that reflected off the white of the ice. Hundreds of warriors fell in agony. Lazarus was thrown back by the blast, and his world went black. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please give a like, and don't forget to subscribe to become a part of our ever-growing Imperium of subscribers.